While I'm doing that, one of the most interesting things that we see as we run across the country.
Say out loud, your work will never hang in a museum. No. Bob!
Bob Ross made painting feel like magic, and for 31 seasons, he invited millions of viewers into his world. But what if I told you that behind those peaceful landscapes was a storm brewing? The Bob Ross we saw on screen, the kind, soft-spoken artist, was also a man caught in a tangled web of personal struggles. And now, his son, Steve Ross, has confirmed the truth that so many suspected. This is the story they never wanted you to hear. In this video, we'll find out the true story in details. Come along as we find out together. Steve Ross, following in his father's footsteps. Steve Ross never set out to be a painting instructor like his father, Bob Ross. At first, he wasn't even all that interested in the family business. Can you imagine? Growing up with Bob Ross as your dad, surrounded by art, and still not being sure if that's your path? But life has a funny way of bringing things full circle. Steve eventually found himself drawn, quite literally, into the world of painting, not just as Bob Ross's son, but as an artist in his own right. And once he fully embraced it, he carried on his father's legacy in a way that felt both familiar and uniquely his own. He wasn't just copying Bob, he was building on what his dad started, adding his own flair and teaching style while keeping the heart of what made Bob Ross's art so beloved. Bob Ross was the man who made painting feel like magic. With his gentle voice, happy little trees, and calm demeanor, he was the ultimate symbol of peace and positivity. But after his passing, whispers started to spread, stories that didn't match the image we all knew and loved. And now, years later, his own son has finally broken his silence. What was Bob Ross really like when the cameras stopped rolling? Were the rumors true? And why did it take so long for his son to speak out? Stay with us until the very end, because the truth about Bob Ross might just change everything you thought you knew. His earliest brushes with fame, pun totally intended, came when he started appearing on The Joy of Painting. If you've ever watched those old episodes, you probably remember seeing Steve, nervous, a little stiff, clearly still finding his footing, reading viewer questions while his dad painted effortlessly beside him. His first appearance was in the very last episode of the first season, which, in hindsight, feels like a passing of the torch moment. Bob was already a seasoned pro, and Steve? Well, he was just getting started. But as the seasons went on, you could see him grow more comfortable, more confident. By the time he was painting on camera himself, he wasn't just Bob Ross's kid trying to keep up. He was an artist, fully in his element. And Bob, ever the proud dad, made sure viewers knew just how talented his son was. Every once in a while, when we can get him off the road from teaching, I have my son Steve come in and do a little painting for us, Bob would say, beaming. And you could tell it wasn't just for show. He genuinely believed in Steve's talent. Now, let's talk about the wet-on-wet technique, because if you know anything about Bob Ross, you know that's kind of his thing. Except, well, it wasn't originally his thing. Bob learned it from Bill Alexander, the Austrian painter who basically pioneered this approach. But Bob refined it, made it look effortless. And Steve? He learned it straight from the master. You could see him using the exact same approach, down to the little details, starting with a thin, even coat of liquid white, blending colors directly on the canvas, layering wet paint over wet paint so the whole thing came together like magic. And just like his dad, Steve had a favorite subject: mountains. He once admitted on camera, "I love to paint mountains. I'd say they're about my favorite thing." And honestly, can you blame him? There's something almost meditative about the way he painted them, pulling colors down with his palette knife, shaping peaks and ridges with just a few strokes. Watching him work, you could tell he wasn't just copying his dad. He was fully immersed in the art, making it his own. But Steve wasn't content to just be Bob Ross's son. He built a name for himself outside of the joy of painting, traveling all over the country to teach art workshops. For years, he crisscrossed America, showing people how to bring landscapes to life on canvas. He loved the job, not just for the painting, but for the connections he made along the way. Between that and the people you meet, I'd say there's just no better job than being a painting instructor, he once said. But then, in 1995, everything changed. Bob Ross passed away and Steve stepped away from painting. It makes sense. Losing a parent is devastating. And when your career is so closely tied to that parent, it's even harder to keep going. For a long time, it seemed like he might never return to painting at all. But art has a way of calling you back. Years later, in 2021, Steve resurfaced with his first public exhibition at the Northern Waters Casino Resort in Watersmeet, Michigan. And let's just say, the reaction was exactly what you'd expect. People were in awe. Michael Broderick, the casino's general manager, raved about Steve's work, calling it masterful, delicate, and nuanced. That's the thing about Steve. His paintings have this quiet beauty, this subtle depth that goes beyond just technique. It's emotion on canvas. And while he still honors his father's legacy, he's also made it clear that he's his own artist. He doesn't believe in rigid precision when it comes to painting. I don't believe precision is very artistic myself. Some people have different opinions, he once shared. That's the heart of what makes him different from Bob. Where Bob focused on happy little trees and soothing narration, Steve brings a more introspective energy. He understands, just like his father did, that painting isn't just about making something look good. It's about the feeling it gives you. I can't think of anything else in the whole world that makes me feel like painting does. It really, really is special, he said. And isn't that the best way to sum up what art should be? Not just a skill, not just a profession, but something that makes you feel alive. The Netflix documentary that changed everything. When Bob Ross, Happy Accidents, Betrayal and Greed dropped on Netflix in August 2021, it felt like a gut punch to anyone who grew up watching the soft-spoken painter create happy little trees on TV. I mean, Bob Ross was supposed to be that one figure in pop culture who was completely untouchable, pure, peaceful, and all about spreading joy with a paintbrush. But this documentary, it pulled back the curtain and revealed a side of his legacy that most people had no idea existed. And let me tell you, it wasn't pretty. It was a full-blown mess of legal battles, shady business dealings, and a heartbreaking story about how the people closest to him fought over his name and empire after he died. Can you imagine? The same man who just wanted the world to relax and paint was, in reality, the center of some of the nastiest behind-the-scenes drama. Directed by Joshua Rofe and produced by Melissa McCarthy and Ben Falcone, the documentary mainly follows Bob's son, Steve Ross, as he finally gets the chance to speak out about what happened after his father passed away in 1995. And Steve does not hold back. One of the first things he says in the film is, "I've wanted to get this story out for all these years. What they did was shameful, and people should know that." And right there, You know this isn't going to be a feel-good nostalgic trip down memory lane. This is a straight-up expose. The core of the story revolves around Bob Ross Inc., BRI, the company that was originally created to sell painting supplies and instructional videos in the 1980s. But according to the film, it became something much darker after Bob's passing. Now, here's where it gets really insane. The documentary drops multiple bombshells, but the most shocking one? The Kowalskis, Bob's longtime business partners, allegedly tried to make him sign away the rights to his own name and likeness on his deathbed. Yeah, you read that right. The man was literally dying of lymphoma at just 52 years old, and they were still trying to squeeze whatever they could out of him. And when he refused to sign, the film claims it led to a heated argument that left Bob furious. Can you even imagine? A man who spent his entire life preaching kindness and peace, spending his final days battling over his own name? It's heartbreaking. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. The film also strongly hints at an affair between Bob Ross and Annette Kowalski, which, if true, would complicate things even further. But the biggest revelation is how the Kowalskis ended up with everything after Bob died. His name, his brand, his likeness, all of it. The documentary portrays them as ruthless business people who used aggressive legal tactics to shut down anyone who got in their way. And when you hear the stories from people who knew Bob, you start to realize just how much was taken from him and his family. The situation with Steve Ross is especially heartbreaking. He had to fight a long legal battle against the Kowalskis just to get what he felt was rightfully his. But despite his efforts, things didn't go his way. In 2018, he filed a federal lawsuit, trying to reclaim some of his father's legacy. But by then, it was almost too late. Bob had left most of his estate to his half-brother Jimmy Cox, who later handed it over to the Kowalskis in 1997. And just like that, Bob Ross Inc. was completely out of the Ross family's hands. But here's what's really wild. Getting this documentary made wasn't easy. The filmmakers ran into major roadblocks because so many people were too scared to talk on camera. McCarthy and Falcone even mentioned in interviews that at least a dozen people refused to be involved, fearing legal retaliation from the Kowalskis. Even Falcone himself admitted, "Everyone's afraid of getting sued. Even as we're having this discussion with you now, we've been kind of warned to keep to the basics. Try not to get too into it because we will get sued." Imagine being that powerful that people are still walking on eggshells around you years later. And when the documentary finally came out, social media exploded. Fans who had adored Bob Ross for years were livid. People couldn't believe what they were hearing. This wasn't just some minor business dispute. This was his entire legacy being controlled by people who, according to the documentary, didn't have his best interests at heart. The backlash was fierce. One journalist summed it up perfectly. The back half of the documentary alleges that a combination of legal pressure, questionable ethics, and full-on bullying may have led to their ability to control the intellectual property and branding behind Bob Ross Inc. And honestly, that's exactly what it felt like. But of course, Bob Ross Inc. didn't just sit back and take the hit. They quickly released a statement calling the film inaccurate and heavily slanted, and claiming the filmmakers never really gave them a chance to tell their side. They also pointed out that Steve Ross's lawsuit had actually been dismissed in 2017 and that everything had been settled through a standard court-ordered mediation process. In other words, they wanted people to believe that this was all old news being stirred up for drama. But after watching the documentary, a lot of people weren't buying it. Here's the thing, though. Despite all the legal mess, the corporate greed, and the heartbreaking way his legacy was handled, Bob Ross himself remains untouchable in the hearts of fans. If anything, this documentary made people love and appreciate him even more. Because now they weren't just admiring his paintings and his soothing voice, they were recognizing the man behind the brand. A man who, despite all the battles and betrayals, never stopped doing what he loved. Joshua Rofe, the director, summed it up best. In many ways, I think of this as a father-son story and a reminder of what life could be like when we're robbed of years with our loved ones because somebody gets sick and passes away far too early. And that's exactly what makes this documentary so powerful. It's not just about Bob Ross, the icon, it's about Bob Ross, the person. And honestly, if there's one thing to take away from this whole saga, it's that corporate greed is ugly, but real art, real passion, that's forever. Bob Ross spent his life trying to make the world a more beautiful place, and no amount of lawsuits or shady business deals can ever take that away. Bob Ross was more than just a painter, he was a legend. His soothing voice, his endless positivity, his belief that there were no mistakes, just happy accidents. It all made him one of the most beloved TV personalities of all time. But after his passing, whispers started to grow. Was everything as perfect as it seemed? Or was there a hidden side to Bob Ross that no one ever talked about? Now, his son is finally speaking up, confirming what many had suspected but never dared to say. And trust me, the truth is more complicated than you think. Stick with us till the very end, because what really happened behind the scenes will change the way you see Bob Ross forever. Steve confirms the long-standing rumor. The Netflix documentary was packed with shocking revelations, but one detail stood out like a sore thumb. Steve Ross confirming that his father, Bob Ross, had an affair with his business partner, Annette Kowalski. Bob and Annette's story started in 1982 under tragic circumstances. Annette, who had just lost her son, attended one of Bob's painting workshops as a way to cope with her grief. From the moment she saw him, something clicked. She wasn't just drawn to his talent, she saw a business opportunity, and she was right. Bob had a unique presence, a voice that felt like a warm hug, and a painting style that made even the most artistically challenged person believe they could create a masterpiece. So when Annette told him, "I don't know what you've got, but I think we ought to bottle it and sell it," she wasn't just throwing words around. She meant business. From that point on, Bob and Annette became inseparable. Professionally, at first, Annette and her husband, Walt Kowalski, played a crucial role in making Bob Ross a household name. They helped turn his TV presence into a full-blown business empire, selling painting supplies, instructional materials, and of course, the famous Joy of Painting brand. It all seemed picture-perfect until it wasn't. At some point, their professional relationship started crossing personal lines. And here's where things get messy. Bob was married to his second wife, Jane, at the time. But according to Steve, his father and Annette's relationship went beyond business. In the documentary, he doesn't beat around the bush. He flat out says, "There was an affair between my father and Annette, yes." Can you imagine sitting on that kind of truth for years, knowing people were speculating but never saying a word? Steve finally decided to lay it all out, confirming what had long been whispered behind closed doors. Now, let's talk about how this affected the Ross family. Because, as you can imagine, this wasn't something that could just be swept under the rug. Steve recalls hearing a heated argument between his father and stepmother Jane after she found out about the affair. And listen, if you've ever witnessed a serious argument between a married couple, you already know things must have been intense. Despite this, Bob and Jane stayed together until Jane's passing in 1992, but their marriage was never quite the same. The affair cast a long shadow over everything, including the business partnership between the Rosses and the Kowalskis. Steve puts it plainly in the documentary. The partnership between the Kowalskis and the Rosses was never quite the same after that. And honestly, how could it be? This wasn't just some minor workplace drama. It was a full-blown betrayal that blurred the lines between business and personal life in the worst way possible. Over time, that tension only grew, setting the stage for the fierce legal battles that would come after Bob's passing. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The Kowalskis deny everything. Yep, despite Steve's first-hand account, they insist that there was never an affair, nor was their relationship with Bob ever fractured at any point. Now, call it damage control or call it denial, but that's a pretty bold claim considering what Steve has shared. And let's be honest, people don't just make up stories like this, especially when there's so much at stake. For years, Steve kept his father's personal life out of the spotlight. He stayed quiet, even as rumors swirled. But in the Netflix documentary, he decided it was time to speak his truth. And can you blame him? When you're watching people rewrite history, while you know the real story, there's only so long you can stay silent. Steve admits that this was not an easy thing to talk about. It's one thing to tell the world your father was a brilliant artist and an amazing teacher. It's another to confirm that he had an affair that led to deep, lasting fractures in both his family and his business. But for Steve, revealing this truth was part of explaining why the Ross and Kowalski families ended up on opposite sides of bitter legal battles. It wasn't just about money or business deals. It was about a history of broken trust, betrayal, and personal wounds that never fully healed. And when you think about it, it makes sense. As Bob's health declined, these old wounds only deepened. The legal fights that came after weren't just about controlling Bob Ross's name and legacy. They were about unresolved tensions that had been bubbling under the surface for years. The affair wasn't just some scandalous secret. It was a turning point that changed everything. The battle over Bob Ross, Inc. Bob Ross, with his calming voice, effortless brushstrokes, and signature permed hair, became one of the most beloved TV painters of all time. But behind those peaceful landscapes and happy little trees was a business empire that turned into a legal battlefield, one that would affect his family for decades. Back in 1984, Bob Ross Inc. was born. It wasn't just Bob's company. He owned it with his wife, Jane, and two of their closest friends, Walt and Annette Kowalski. Each of them had an equal 25% share. Now, at first glance, this might seem fair, right? Everyone gets a piece of the pie, but there was one small detail in their agreement that would change everything. If any partner died, their share wouldn't go to their family, it would be split between the remaining partners. Sounds like a small technicality, but trust me, that one clause set the stage for the legal mess that came later. At first, things ran smoothly. Bob Ross was the face of the company. His TV show, The Joy of Painting, was exploding in popularity, and the business was thriving. But despite being the reason people tuned in, Bob never actually had full control of the company that carried his name. Then, in 1992, tragedy struck. Jane Ross passed away. And because of that business agreement, her 25% didn't go to Bob. It was automatically divided between Walt and Annette Kowalski. Just like that, Bob was no longer an equal partner. He owned only 1/3 of the company, while the Kowalskis controlled 2/3. And if you've ever been in a situation where someone else holds the majority of the power, you know how this was about to play out. Things took a turn for the worse when Bob got sick. In 1994, while he was battling lymphoma, the Kowalskis saw their opportunity. They brought him a contract, hoping he would sign over the rights to his name, image, and everything he had ever created. According to Bob's son, Steve Ross, it wasn't just a casual conversation, it was a full-blown confrontation. Steve remembers hearing his father yelling, "I'm not giving you my name!" He knew exactly what was happening. The Kowalskis weren't just asking for a contract. They were trying to take ownership of the very thing that made Bob Ross who he was. Now, Bob may have been soft-spoken on TV, but he wasn't about to be pushed around. Instead of signing the contract, he changed his will. He made sure that when he passed away, his name, image, and everything he had created would go to his son, Steve, and his half-brother, Jimmy Cox. It was his way of making sure his legacy stayed with his family, not with his business partners. But unfortunately, things weren't that simple. Bob Ross passed away on July 4, 1995, and that's when the real legal battle began. The Kowalskis wasted no time. Because of that original business agreement, they had the right to buy Bob's remaining 1/3 of the company from his estate. And then they took it a step further. They filed a lawsuit claiming that everything Bob had ever done, every painting, every tutorial, every little happy tree, was work for hire. In other words, they argued that Bob never had the right to leave his name and image to his family in the first place, because it already belonged to the company. It's the kind of legal loophole that makes your stomach turn. At that point, Bob's half-brother Jimmy was in charge of the estate, and he had a tough choice to make. Fighting the Kowalskis in court would take years and a lot of money that he just didn't have. So, in 1997, he settled. The Kowalskis got exactly what they wanted: full control over Bob Ross's name, likeness, and all of his creative works. That was the moment when Bob Ross Inc. officially became theirs. Steve, Bob's son, didn't stand a chance. Years later, in 2017, Steve tried to fight back. He sued Bob Ross Inc., hoping to reclaim his father's name and legacy. But in 2019, a federal judge ruled against him, stating that the contracts Bob had signed over the years legally gave those rights to the Kowalskis. And that was that. The fight was over. Today, Bob Ross Inc. is still thriving, but it's not run by Bob's family. Instead, it's operated by Joan Kowalski, Walt and Annette's daughter. The company makes millions off Bob's legacy. His face is on T-shirts. His paintings are on everything from coffee mugs to socks. And even Netflix has a documentary about his life. But the sad truth? Not a penny of that money goes to Bob's own son. Steve Ross, the man who should have inherited his father's legacy, was completely cut out. We all know Bob Ross as the soft-spoken, kind-hearted artist who made painting look as easy as breathing. But what if we told you there were secrets behind that smile? For years, rumors have swirled about Bob Ross's life behind the cameras, stories that didn't match the peaceful image we all knew. And now, his son, Steve Ross, has finally broken his silence. What really happened to Bob Ross behind the scenes? What did Steve go through after losing his father? And why did he stay silent for so long? The truth is more heartbreaking than you'd expect. And by the end of this video, you'll see Bob Ross and his legacy in a way you never have before. Steve's struggle after his father's death. Steve Ross's world turned upside down when his father, Bob Ross, passed away in 1995. You know how people say time heals all wounds? Well, for Steve, it didn't feel that way. His dad wasn't just his father, he was his mentor, his best friend, and his guide through life. Losing him was like having the sun suddenly disappear from the sky, leaving nothing but darkness. And that darkness, it swallowed Steve whole. Bob Ross was all about spreading joy, making people feel at peace with a simple paintbrush and a blank canvas. But for Steve, life after his dad's passing was anything but peaceful. His world became a place of sorrow, isolation, and emotional exhaustion. And honestly, he didn't see a way out. At one point, the pain got so bad that Steve actually considered ending it all. Imagine feeling so lost, so completely shattered, that you start thinking about swerving into oncoming traffic just to stop hurting. That's where he was. Grief wasn't just something he carried. It was something that crushed him under its weight every single day. And the thing that had always been his refuge, painting, became the very thing he couldn't bear to do anymore. Every brushstroke was a reminder of his dad. Every color a painful memory. So he stopped painting, stopped teaching, stopped being a part of the world his father had built. For years, Steve Ross disappeared from public life, retreating into himself like a hermit. Can you imagine that? Going from having a famous, beloved father to suddenly being alone, avoiding the very thing that once brought you joy. For nearly 15 years, Steve barely painted. He only created enough art to scrape by financially, but even that became too much. Eventually, he abandoned it completely. And the saddest part? He didn't even realize that people still cared, that fans of his father and of him were out there wondering where he was, hoping he'd return to the art world. He thought the world had moved on, but oh, how wrong he was. Fast forward to 2019, and something shifted. After nearly 25 years of grief, legal battles, and self-imposed isolation, Steve Ross finally found his way back. He picked up a paintbrush again, not just for himself, but for the people who had been waiting all these years. His comeback started small, in a little town called Winchester, Indiana, where he hosted a painting workshop with Dana Jester, one of his father's closest friends, and a certified Bob Ross instructor. What happened next? Well, it was nothing short of amazing. People showed up in droves, dozens of painters, hundreds of fans, and thousands more watching online. The love was still there. The admiration, the excitement, the pure joy of watching Steve Ross paint again. And that one event? It reignited something inside him. Suddenly, he wasn't just grieving Bob Ross anymore, he was carrying on his legacy. Steve started teaching painting workshops again, traveling to places like Tennessee and Colorado to share his knowledge. He even held classes at the Blount County Library in Maryville, Tennessee, near the breathtaking Great Smoky Mountain National Park. Along the way, he partnered with artist Bram Bevins in 2022, teaming up to bring more people into the world of painting. But just when things were looking up, life threw another curveball. In 2022, Steve suffered a heart attack. Just like that, everything had to pause again. It was yet another challenge, another obstacle in his journey back to himself. But if there's one thing Steve Ross has proven, it's that he doesn't give up. His recovery is going well, and even though he had to step back from teaching for a while, he's determined to start again. Steve Ross's story isn't just about grief, it's about resilience. About finding your way back after losing everything. About realizing that even when you think the world has forgotten you, there are still people out there who care, who believe in you, who want to see you succeed. And most importantly, it's a story about how, no matter how painful the past may be, it's never too late to pick up the brush and start again. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.